Good afternoon, everyone. And for those watching at home, this is a webinar on transition to college for students with disabilities. If you are at home and watching, we're doing a Q&A at the end. I'm sorry you can't join us, but hopefully you'll get enough good info. For those who are here in my audience, go ahead and put your questions in the chat and we'll address them at the end. So let's get going. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Laura Kazan. I am the college advisor for iLEAD. I also really love to do this transition webinar because I'm also the parent of two kids who had IEPs all the way through high school, and one used college disability services and the other one didn't. So I like to try to deal with myths and things that kind of go haywire as you're planning for the transition to college. So let's get started. I'm going to start with some true and false questions. And in fact, I'm going to pull my chat box back out because I want you to answer true or false in the chat box. Question number one. So I want to kind of see where we are. True or false? The only option for students with disabilities is to start at a community college. So the only option, or I'll change that to the best option for students with disabilities is to start at a community college. Please put true or false in the chat box. What do you think? What is your opinion? We got a lot of falses. Okay, good, because the answer to that one is false. Community college is definitely an option. I don't want to make this be an anti-community college. It's not. But I want to express that if a student has been successful in high school with college preparatory work, there's no reason to take away the option of a four-year college simply because a student has a disability. They can be successful. And so I want to squash that right away because so many students and parents are told just straight to community college because of a disability. Not true. Okay, good. So far, so good. Next question. Harvard, Stanford, and other selective private colleges do not have to provide accommodations for students with disabilities. So basically this question, true or false? Selective colleges do not have to provide accommodations, true or false? We're getting a lot of falses. Very good. Very, very good. Let's go ahead and yes, absolutely false. They do have to provide accommodations. Any college that accepts federal funds, that could be grants or loans, has to provide basic accommodations, and that includes selective colleges. So there is no college that takes federal funds that can basically say, tough luck. You have a disability, not our problem. Every college must provide basic accommodations. We'll get more into that as we go. Okay, next one. You guys are doing so good so far. We have 100%. True or false? Only students who have accommodations in high school can have accommodations in college. It's the trickier one. True or false? You have to have accommodations in high school to get accommodations in college. Think that's true or false? We're getting a lot of falses in the chat. Okay. You guys are doing great. That is false. Any student with a disability, regardless of whether they have a 504 or IEP, may be eligible for college accommodations. Notice I'm kind of hedging my bets here. They may be eligible for college accommodations. Talk about that a little bit more, but the key to this question is no, they don't have to come in with a history of accommodations or documentation from the high school in order to receive them at the college level. And especially at a place like iLEAD where everything is really kind of individualized and students may not actually need accommodations because of our model. I often get parents that worry that, well, I don't have the documentation. Does that mean it's automatically off the table? And the answer is no, like accommodations do not have to be recognized at the high school level. Okay, next one. This is my trickiest one. A 504 or a 504 plan expires after high school. True or false? I'm curious about your answers here. True or false? A 504 expires after high school. There's nobody answering. Okay, we've got a true. Anyone else want to take a guess? We have a false with a question mark. Yeah, this is a tricky one. Does a 504 expire, true or false? It needs to be renewed. This is my trickiest question. And in fact, even staff members that work with transition get this one wrong. True. A 504 expires. And we're going to go much more in depth than that in this presentation. 504s and IEPs expire after high school. They do not follow you. They do not follow you. I'll give you a little bit more. Okay. I think I got one more. Last one. Having accommodations in high school automatically makes a student eligible for accommodations in college. True or false? Having accommodations in high school automatically makes a student eligible for accommodations in college. What do we got in the chat box? Let's see. We've got false, we've got false, we've got false. Folks, you guys are pretty good. Indeed, it is not automatic. The college determines the student's eligibility, not the high school. So with these questions out of the way, that was your pre-test. And I'm pretty pleased. You guys are doing great on the tests here in the webinar. Let's go ahead and actually talk about what happens at college. Now, I just want to indicate that this particular presentation is aimed at students that are heading to either a community college or a four-year college with a traditional type of program. So this particular presentation is aimed at students that are able to handle a typical level of college rigor. I can easily talk to parents whose children need to have something that's more life skills oriented. There are plenty of programs like that as well, but this presentation, that's the audience that we're aiming at. So let's talk about what exists. We have 4 levels of services when you head to college. All colleges must provide the basic accommodations. It could be a small office run by a single person or a skeleton staff, or maybe it's larger, but the minimum you're going to get is an office with very basic accommodations. Nothing costs a fee. These are going to be accommodations that are pretty, typical, extended time, that type of thing. We're going to talk about the details of what types of accommodations you might see, but I'm looking more at the level of the level of programming. So the very minimum, basic. Sometimes you'll find some colleges have enhanced services. Once again, we're at a level of things that are free. They might include workshops or a learning coach or a specialist. They might include classes or help with time management. Maybe they have an assistive technology specialist. There may be limited appointments available. So we're kind of moving up. This is still a situation where it is up to the college, their funding, their kind of what the college chooses to offer. My son, who is at Evergreen, has pretty enhanced services that are completely free that just we had no idea they were like that when he went. But he has quite a few services if he chooses to take advantage of them. Whereas other colleges, they don't. And this is one of the reasons you go and you talk to the disability services before you make your final decision. Moving up a level for disability services, there are colleges throughout the United States that have fee-based programs. These are traditional colleges that have a program that's alongside. You apply to the program when you apply to the college. And if your student is accepted in that program, they are fee-based and they have significantly higher level of support. Some of them may be very structured. They may have learning specialists, they may have case management, ADHD coaching. The one that really comes to mind is the SALT Center, which has some fee-based programs. That's, I think it's Arizona State. Am I right with that, Ann? It's not University of Arizona, it's Arizona State. University of Arizona? Yes, okay. I know it's in Arizona. It's in one of them. But there's a lot of colleges that do have fee-for-service programs. I've noticed them in some of the STEM colleges too, especially programs that are specialized for students with ADHD and autism spectrum disorders. I'm seeing those pop up a lot more. If you have a student that's interested in a fee-based program, something more structured, I'm happy to take a look. There's more and more programs every year, and I can't keep track of them, so I tend to do a lot of searching. And then at the very, very top level are 2 colleges that are comprehensive. The college itself, the entire college, is designed for a student with some kind of a learning difference. Landmark in Vermont and Beacon in Florida. They have 4-year degrees. They have 2-year degrees, but the beauty of those 2 colleges is that every student there has some kind of a learning difference or ADHD or autism. And so the professors, the courses, everything is designed to provide a higher level of support. So 4 different levels of services, and you have to do that as part of your research. When you are picking out colleges, making your college list, the disability services should be part of that list making. So I want to turn our attention a little bit to the differences between what happens in high school and what happens in college, so that everyone is aware that there are vast differences between the two. Let's start with law. So the legal entity, the legal requirements between college and high school, a lot of times is the first thing that's kind of shocking when you start looking at the differences. In high school, we are governed by the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, IDEA, whereas in college, that's gone, that expires, like we said, and you are under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Here's one of the weird things, and this is the number 504. So Section 504 subpart D is the 504 plan that you hear about in high school, or that you may have in high school. That's where we hear the word 504 plan. That 504 plan does not exist in college. Instead, you are under Section 504 subpart E, which is why it's so confusing, because the wording is the same, but it isn't the same thing. So you are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the documentation and everything is under a different section of 504. I think the most important thing, if there's anything you take away from this webinar, is the difference between success and access. When you are in high school, when your learner is in high school, it is all about success. Success becomes the responsibility of the school. It is our job to make sure your learner is successful. We have IEPs, we have goals, we have accommodations, we have whatever we need to ensure their success, where ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is about access, that the student has access to the curriculum, that the student has access physically to courses, to buildings, to things like that. So we're looking at 2 very different things, and let's go more in depth into those different things. Success versus access. Let's start with the documentation. So in a high school, the school provides the evaluations, they provide the documentation that you need. You'll find you have a gazillion forms, and the documentation focuses on whether the student is eligible for service, and under what category the student is eligible. As you know, we have 13 categories under IDEA, under the IEP. And so there's a lot of documentation that's done by the high school. However, unfortunately, when you get to college, there are some colleges that will accept an IEP or 504 as documentation, but most do not. I will say here, the community college system in California, brilliant. They will take your IEP or 504. They are great, whether that is for dual enrollment or if the student decides to go straight to a community college, they will take that documentation, but that's rare, and we're just lucky. Specifically, four-year colleges tend to require that you bring in documentation. So they require documentation at the family's expense. And that is one of the dilemmas now, is that in the high school, anyone can get documentation because the high school performs the evaluations, but in the college, you're expected to pay for that and bring it in yourself. Now, you notice I have the word may kind of underlined. Students may need to get evaluations at their own expense. Once in a while, you'll find a really friendly college that is easy to work with. That tends to not be our UCs or CSUs, unfortunately. I've actually seen a student with very good documentation done by us automatically rejected, told to go bring in something else. That was Fullerton. So you really have to look at each college, fingers crossed, but do prepare for the fact that you might need to bring in your own documentation. The documentation must provide specific information on the nature of the condition or disability, the limitations, and demonstrate the need for accommodations. So we can see that there is some difference between what's needed at high school, what's needed at college, but this is one of the first major differences. Now, this is the biggie. If there was anything that I want to express to the students that I work with, is that self-advocacy becomes one of the most vital things that you can learn in order to succeed at college. Let's look at the difference. In high school, the students identified by the school. There is support by parents. There is support by teachers. There is support by administrators. The primary responsibility for arranging accommodations belongs to us, belongs to the school. We are required to ensure your success. If a student is having difficulty, the teacher should approach them. Everything is in the hands of the school. But when you move to the college, everything becomes in the hands of the student, and the student must learn to self-advocate. They must self-identify to the Office of Disability Services. And if they don't get any services. The student must say, I am a student with a disability and I need accommodations. It is their responsibility to self-advocate and to arrange accommodations. I had a whole incident where my son needed extended time and missed the deadline to take his test. Guess whose fault that was? And guess who had to deal with it? It was his, not the school. It was a fiasco. But anyway, the primary responsibility belongs to the student and professors, very different from a teacher. Professor expects the student to initiate contact and let them know if they need assistance. The professor actually doesn't know what the student's disability is, or even if they have one. It is up to the student to arrange for the professor to know what they need. And so one of the things that becomes so important at the high school level is learning self-advocacy. So the student is ready to self-advocate in college. And that leads us to, what's the role of a parent? So in high school, all the way up to 18 or even beyond, the parents have full access to everything, the student records, the accommodation process. In fact, the IEPs tend to be between the parent and the school. Often students aren't even involved with their own special education. We try to get them involved as they get older, but it really is typically the parent and the administration. So the parent is the main advocate, and the parent controls the privacy. The parent controls the documentation. We call that FERPA, and that is the Privacy Act. But then college comes and everything changes. The parent does not have access to student records without the student's written consent. And I need to express that this is true at the community college as well, even if the student is a dual enrollment student. There are some ways around this, but you're not going to get a lot of friendly help on the college side because they really want any student that's there to be an adult. Even if they're 14, they have higher expectations. The student controls their own privacy. They advocate themselves, and this includes any college. So the student controls their privacy. They can let the parent have access to things, but there really is a big difference between who's in charge. At the high school level, it is the parent. At the college level, it becomes the student. And we go back to that self-advocacy again. Diving a little bit more into FERPA, privacy and self-advocacy for college students. Okay, communication suddenly becomes between the student and the college. The student may waive their privacy and give the parent access to information, but it's only information and documentation typically that the parent has access to. The student can also revoke that waiver. So the student might say, you know what, I want my parents fully involved. I'm giving them permission. I'm signing the paperwork, and then they may change their mind and they can just remove it. And that is their prerogative because in the eyes of the college, they are considered an adult. It applies even though the parent is paying tuition. In fact, the parent can't even talk to the financial aid office when they write their check without the student's permission. So we kind of got some interesting things going on here now because of privacy. The student must self-advocate with the Office of Disabilities, professors, housing, school staff, everything. Cal State, or not Cal State, but Long Beach City College. I heard this from two different parents that didn't even know each other. It happened with both of them. They went into admission. They wanted to just register their kids for dual enrollment, and both of them got, I hate to say it, yelled at by the staff members for not having their student there with them and not having their student do the registration themselves. They were really, I just want to make it clear, they're really nice to the student, but they were not nice to the parent. And this happened 2 different years, 2 different people. They want that student to do the advocacy and they will not easily work with the parent. This is true even if the student is attending something that is fee-based. So there was a situation at Landmark that I knew of. I talked to a parent about this. The student, Landmark is one that is 100% for students with disabilities. It's very, very pricey. The parent is paying the amount. Students not going to class, students failing everything. And the parent had no idea. And then the student failed out because the parent didn't have access. And remember, you can get a signed waiver, but it is up to the student to give you permission to have that information. So I just want to make everyone aware that the student becomes in charge. Okay, let's move over now to looking at academic support and instruction between high school and college. It looks very different. In high school, I think you're used to a lot of the adjustments that we typically do, curriculum, pace, and just in general, a class is formatted differently. You often see students are reading shorter assignments, followed by discussion. Things are retaught in class, tutoring, study support. That may actually be part of an IEP. We have SAI, we have all kinds of things to support a student academically. I know that like there's a lot of things that just automatically go on to an IEP or 504 where, you know, you can do half your math problems, you can have shorter essays. There's all kinds of things at the high school level that can be done to accommodate a student, not so at the college. So there are accommodations that happen at the college that allow for access. Remember, we're always looking at the difference between success and access. So accommodations have to be given that allow students equal access to material, that allow students equal access, but it doesn't change the course. So we already have vast differences. In college, students are assigned larger amounts of reading and writing, and some of these materials may not be directly addressed in class. The students are expected to get information outside of class, inside of class, synthesize that information. Very different look. But more importantly, the help that a student is used to getting at a high school level, especially here at a place, like iLEAD or other charters where we have SAI, we have one-on-one services, tutoring and academic support does not fall under disability resources. It doesn't fall under part of what disability services provide. Those students must seek out their own tutoring services and those are available for all students. The Writing Center, there's usually one-on-one tutoring available through peers that is included with tuition, but it's not special. So there is no requirement for the student to succeed. There's only a requirement for the student to have access. Something else that may be very different is, at a high school level, you're allowed to make adjustments to the coursework. Like I said, that only odd number problems. That typical in-class adjustment does not happen at the college level. Anything that changes the course itself, that has some kind of a modification, can be automatically denied. And so you need to be very aware that there are massive differences, and it always goes back to that concept of success versus access. Grading and tests. It's very common to have adjustments to tests at the high school level. Adjustments to the formatting, adjustments to the grading. The testing is frequent. You have constant tests and small amounts of material. Makeups are easy. And students often are allowed to retake a test to get a higher score. Teachers, it's their responsibility to remind students of their assignments, of their due dates, of things like that. The high school, we really try to nurture. Once again, it's about success. But college, we're in a different world now. Things are not adjustable. They're generally not, the format changes, the grading changes are generally not available. Testing is often very different. Sometimes it's infrequent and maybe cumulative. It covers larger amounts of material. You may have a class that is only 3 tests, and that's it. That's your whole grade. Typically, they don't allow makeup tests. That's rare. That's very high school. That's not very college. Once in a while, you might get a friendly professor, but typically not. The one thing that tends to be constant and that tends to be positive is that the way tests are given. It's pretty easy to get extended time, and it's pretty easy to have a situation where the student can take a test in an environment that is distraction free. That seems to be across the board. So often when you go to a college, if you need a distraction-free test environment, you need extended time. They actually have a place for that. You take your test in a different location. That's a common accommodation. But a lot of the things that you see at the high school are not very common. And I just want to make sure everyone is aware of the changes. Access versus success. Study responsibilities at the high school level, tutoring, support, that's often provided as part of the IEP. Assignments, structures. I mean, one of the things I hear from our EFs all the time is that they're setting the pacing. I help by setting the pacing. So-and-so was falling behind, so I set a pacing guide. I hear this all the time. And so that's not going to happen at college. And the amount of studying that is expected from a student at the high school level is much less at a high school than it is with a college. My apologies. Sounds like there is a lawnmower behind me. I will carry on though. So tutoring at the college level does not fall under disability services, as we mentioned in the slide before, and is not considered an academic adjustment. The students have to seek out the tutoring themselves, self-advocacy. It's always coming back to self-advocacy. Students manage their own time and they complete their assignments independently. There is no one setting up a pacing guide. And students have to study a lot more. You know, they're in class typically in a traditional environment every day. Maybe they're, you know, if you're at a learning center, you're taking one of our live classes, you may be there 2 days a week, 3 days a week. And then you do some work out of class, but here you're expected to do about 2 to 3 hours for every hour of in-class work. So it is a very different situation. And so students need to be aware of the differences in the responsibility to their own studying. Now, let's take a moment to look at accommodations that are non-typical, that are not typically granted. A lot of these are pretty surprising for people. So starting with academic, extended time on class assignments. So these are things within the class. We talked about testing. Testing is a pretty typical, easy accommodation to get, extended time on a test, but not on your papers. Not on, and it's especially not a blanket assignment. You know, you end up breaking your arm and you need an accommodation because writing is tough. That's a different situation. You're having a medication adjustment and there's a period of time where you need some support. That, you know, these are all things that can be worked out, but a blanket adjustment on extended time on assignments just isn't going to happen. It's very, very rare. Unlimited time for exams. We typically don't see that. You know, an extra hour, 150%. That's pretty common. Unlimited, not common at all. Sometimes I've seen with in the traditional high school, a lot of times the teacher will give notes to the student ahead of time. Professor does not have to give notes. There is something pretty common, and that is the school will often pay for a classmate to take notes and then give their notes to the student. But then we have issues like if the note taker happens to show up or shows up for that particular class, or, you know, the writing is clear. So they can get a note taker as an accommodation paid for by the college, but that has some pros and cons to it as well. So it's something to be aware of. And there will be almost no course alterations. So reduced problem sets, alternative assignments, reduced assignments, these are typically not approved. Also, this is a biggie, course waivers. And the ones we hear them most about would be foreign language or math. Students that have dyscalculia or a math disability, or students that have a verbal learning disability that causes issues with foreign language. There are some colleges that will waive the course. My older son at Reed, he told me of a student that he was aware of that had a foreign language requirement to graduate, and that particular college, that particular major, they went ahead and waived that. That's rare. It does happen. And so as you're picking out colleges, if foreign language is going to be an issue, that is something to ask. I had a friend whose son was at the University of Chicago and he had pretty strong language-based learning disability. They did not waive it and he almost didn't graduate. Every year he tried the language every year and he made it to a senior year and finally passed it. But he would not have graduated. They would not waive it. Same thing with math. It is something that you need to look at. Do they have a class that is passable if you have a math disability? These are all things you need to think about when you are choosing the college. And academic support, typically, they don't provide academic support as part of disability accommodations, typically available for all students. There's tutoring centers, peer tutors, and then there may be college-specific services. Now, some things that we may be used to in a traditional school setting that you're not going to see in college. This is a biggie, the one-on-one attendance. You might often see, especially in a brick and mortar school, that a student might get one-on-one help. You may have a student with, and this is a biggie, mobile. So someone who has mobility disabilities will almost always get some kind of assistance in a traditional school environment. The college is not required by the Americans with Disabilities Act. They are not required to provide assistance. Colleges are exempt from that requirement. Yes, it happens in the high school. No, they do not have to provide it or pay for it at the college level. And I've seen some tricky situations with students who had some pretty heavy duty mobility disabilities, and it was up to the family to find the provider and to pay for the provider so that the student could succeed in college. Often personal devices, things like iPads and smart pens and things like that, that high school might often provide. It is not a requirement. If the student needs it, it's not a requirement for the college to pay for. Some colleges are great. They have those devices. They have assistive technology. And that is great if you can find those colleges, but they're under no obligation. And I put wake up calls because for some, when I'm on social media, I hear this and I can't believe it's true, but I hear it. There are parents asking the disabilities office to please wake up their children because the kid can't wake up. It's too early in the morning. No, they don't do that. They don't provide wake up calls. It's not a hotel. And I put it on there because I hear it often enough that it actually is something that is requested. And yeah, no. With my son, he had to start taking classes later in the day. He has a sleep disorder, and it was just one of those things where he had to accommodate, he had to figure out his own accommodations and way of dealing with his life to deal with the things that were harder for him. And no one was going to give him a phone call. What can you do now? If you have students that are in younger grades, I love that we saw an 8th grade parent here. We have a few 11th graders. There are some things to work on now. I mentioned self-advocacy. We should all be working on self-advocacy. The kids should be working on self-advocacy. But there are some structured programs. So if the student is still in high school, there's summer campus programs for high school students to practice college skills right on a college campus. I just saw one. I think there's something at CSULB, Cal State Long Beach. I think they take 30 students and you spend time on campus, experience campus life, kind of learn how to navigate. My younger son attended a program at Landmark. It was 3 weeks long. And it was, changing classes, the whole thing, but they specifically were working on different college success skills. So high school has summer programs. There's also summer bridge programs, and these are the times between graduation and college. They may be, some of the community colleges have summer bridge programs for everyone. You'll find a lot of the Promise programs require a bridge program to get everyone used to it, because you know what? It's not just students with disabilities. It's a lot of students that need support on learning how to navigate college, but students with disabilities, we want to make sure that everyone is prepared. So those summer bridge programs, whether they're for disabilities or non-disabilities, that can really help. There's also programs, I've seen a lot of times a student goes to college and they're just not they're not successful. They're not used to the change and support. So you can actually visit a school like Landmark for a semester, like Beacon, or other programs where you need that semester or that year to kind of learn how to navigate with a little more support. So there are programs that happen during college. And I know I had a friend whose child was at Reed and he was doing really poorly and just needed support. And they did, the college, Reed gave them permission to send the son for a year to Landmark to kind of bridge that gap. And then he was allowed to return because they saw that as an academic fix. And so there are situations where if a student isn't succeeding, there is support once they are in college. And so that's always something to just, keep an eye out for. There are some resources. This book right here, The 7 Steps to College Success, Pathway for Students with Disabilities by Elizabeth Hamlet. My name's in there because I gave a lot of advice for that as well. But a lot of the information that I'm giving you is actually pulled from her resources. She runs the College Transition Facebook group. She runs LD Advisory. Understood is a great resource. If you Google Understood, they have all kinds of articles for both K-12, college, everything. great resources. So this book, this is, I think, a third edition. It's excellent. And I know Anne was the one that brought it up. She's manning the door here, but they just had a full day session about learning disabilities and the transition process. And Elizabeth was one of the speakers, and they had other speakers, and they had deans from admission offices and all kinds of stuff. So keep an eye on Elizabeth Hamlet's resources, because she'll tell you when these things are going on and when they're available. I actually met her at a disabilities conference. And she's quite a nice person. Also, the K&W Guide to Colleges for Students with Learning Differences. They try to get as much information as they can and put it all in one place. That's more specific programs at specific colleges. And so that's pretty much my presentation. I'm going to say goodbye to our folks at home who might be watching the recording, and I'm going to jump into our Q&A. So bye to the folks at home. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.